At this threshold, John faced a decision that would scar him for life. And instead of confronting it, he buried it deep within the world he had built. In the summer of 1963, when suburban life was sold as a reward for obedience, and every tidy lawn seemed to promise that the world could be kept in order by effort alone, the Bell House on Alder Lane No. 11 began by removing a single chair. At first, Margaret Bell thought it was forgetfulness. Their dining room table had 5 walnut chairs, and she knew that fact the way women in such homes knew every object entrusted to routine. She polished them, straightened them, counted them without appearing to count them. On Monday morning, there were 5. By Monday evening, there were 4. She searched the patio, the den, the garage, even the basement. Nothing. Her husband John laughed when she mentioned it and suggested that June, their 10-year-old daughter, had dragged it somewhere for play. June denied it at once. The denial was quick enough to be true and frightened enough to be troubling. At dinner, the room looked wrong. Not merely incomplete, wrong in a quieter, colder way, as if the missing chair had been removed not from furniture, but from memory, leaving behind a space that seemed to know more than the people seated around it. John made jokes. Margaret did not laugh. June kept glancing toward the empty place, and once asked whether they should still set something there. John asked why they would do that. June said she did not know, only that the room felt rude without it. Children sometimes say the thing adults have already begun to feel and lack the courage to phrase. Margaret told herself not to be foolish. Yet that night, while washing dishes, she heard a sound from the dining room, like a chair leg scraping slowly across the floor. When she turned, nothing moved. Only the empty place remained. The next thing to vanish was not furniture. It was a photograph. Margaret noticed its absence on Thursday afternoon while dusting the front room. For years, a framed picture had stood on the narrow shelf by the lamp. Margaret in a summer dress, her younger brother Peter beside her. Both of them squinting into sunlight no one had thought then to ration carefully. Now the frame remained, but the photograph itself was gone. No broken glass, no torn backing. The frame stood empty, as though the house had quietly removed not paper, but proof. This time John did not laugh. He searched the house himself, too thoroughly and too angrily for the loss of a photograph. He opened drawers, checked the waste bin, then told Margaret the whole thing was becoming ridiculous. His tone was too sharp. His face had acquired that peculiar strain men wear when reality begins pressing against some private defense they have kept standing too long. That night he dreamed loudly. Margaret woke to find him half risen in bed, drenched in sweat, whispering, "No," over and over, with the exhausted desperation of someone bargaining with a sight he had hoped never to see again. When she touched his arm, he flinched so violently she nearly cried out. He said it was nothing. In the morning, he remembered too little and denied too quickly. After that, the house changed. Not visibly at first. No dramatic shadow crossed the hall. No voice descended the stairs. The alteration was subtler and therefore worse. Rooms cooled without draft. Floorboards ticked at odd hours from spaces no one occupied. June began complaining that someone stood in the corner of her room after the lights were out. Not a person, exactly, she said, but the feeling of one. On 2 occasions, Margaret found her daughter sleeping with the bedroom lamp on, and both hands clutching the blanket under her chin like prayer. John told the child to stop inventing nonsense, but his own nerves had already begun to fray. He started checking the locks twice each night, then 3 times. He started drinking more heavily after supper, not enough to make a spectacle, only enough to blur the edges of what the house was trying to tell him. Once, Margaret found him in the dining room at 1 in the morning, staring at the remaining chairs as if expecting an instruction from them. It was June who first spoke Peter's name. The family was eating in strange silence when she asked whether Uncle Peter had ever liked this room. Margaret looked up at once. John did not. That was what she remembered later. Not surprise, not confusion, but the terrible fixed stillness of a man who has heard a dead name land in the center of the room and knows, before anyone else does, that the years have failed him. Margaret asked June what she meant. June said she had dreamed of a man standing by the table with wet hair and a cut over one eyebrow. He had not frightened her, she said, only looked very sad and kept glancing toward the empty place. Then she added, with childlike certainty, that his name was Peter. Margaret's brother had vanished 8 years earlier. The police had found nothing. No body, no witnesses worth trusting. He had last been seen leaving a bar on the edge of town and had seemed, by all accounts, not especially sober. Over time, the town filed him into the convenient drawer marked Unsolved Cases. Margaret had never forgiven the drawer for closing. John pushed back from the table so hard his glass tipped over. He said June had heard the name from old conversations and stitched it into a dream. Margaret asked when they had spoken of Peter in front of her. John answered too quickly that children hear more than people think. Then he left the room before the meal was finished. That night, Margaret went to the attic. Families store old grief in attics because attics are close enough to reach and far enough to pretend one never reaches them. In a sealed carton marked Holiday, she found another photograph from the summer before Peter vanished. There they all were in the backyard, Margaret younger, June still a baby, John smiling with one arm over Peter's shoulder. Her brother looked careless and alive, and terribly easy to lose, if one believed life obeyed fairness. Tucked behind the photograph was a parking receipt. The date on it was the night Peter disappeared. The location was a roadside tavern on the other side of town. And on the back, in John's handwriting, was one line: "You shouldn't have left." Margaret sat very still on the attic floor. She remembered then a detail she had somehow never joined to the larger shape. The morning after her brother's disappearance, she had found mud on John's shoes, and he had claimed it came from changing a tire. She had believed him because marriage trains belief into reflex. Now, under the weak attic bulb, dark thoughts started to grow in her head, as if something had cracked inside her. Then June's favorite toy disappeared. It was a cloth rabbit, faded blue at the ears, with one button eye replaced by Margaret years earlier. June slept with it every night. By morning, it was gone from the bed. They searched the room, the hall, beneath the porch steps, even the laundry basket. Nothing. June began to cry in the bewildered, betrayed way children do when the world mislays what it has no right to touch. And that same night, something began knocking from inside the basement wall. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. John went white. Margaret woke June and took her upstairs. From the landing, they watched him descend with a flashlight and a bottle in his hand, as if courage and whiskey had become interchangeable. The knocking stopped the moment he reached the bottom step. In the morning, he said he had found nothing, but his shirt cuffs were smeared with plaster dust. By the following week, the Bell house seemed to lean inward around its own secret. Neighbors remarked that the place looked darker, though the weather was clear. June refused to enter the dining room alone. Margaret began hearing movement below the floor while standing at the sink, as though someone paced slowly beneath the kitchen at hours when no living person should have had room to do so. John's nights worsened. He woke choking, once with both hands around his own throat. Another night he screamed Peter's name so clearly that June heard it from the hall and began crying before Margaret could reach her. By then, John had started to look not haunted, but hunted. His temper shortened, his face hollowed. Then June disappeared. It happened at dusk on a Sunday. Margaret had sent her upstairs to fetch a sweater before supper. She never came back. The whole house was searched in minutes, then searched again in madness. Windows were shut. Doors were bolted from inside. June's bedroom was empty, but her bedspread had been dragged partly to the floor, and on the wallpaper beside the lamp, someone, or something, had pressed 5 small gray streaks like fingertips dirty with old dust. John did not call the police at once. That was the moment Margaret understood, with a coldness deeper than suspicion, that whatever was wrong in the house had already made its home inside her husband. A decent man with a missing daughter calls for help before thought. John stood in the hall trembling, looking not at the front door, nor the street, nor the upstairs windows, but toward the basement, toward the place under the house he had been defending from the truth since the first disappearance. Margaret opened the basement door and ran down while he was too shattered to stop her. The basement smelled of earth, old cement, and something colder underneath. The flashlight shook in her hand as she moved past the furnace, past the shelves of preserves, past the coal bin. At the far wall stood the storage cabinet John had placed there years earlier, heavy and awkward in a way she had never before thought to question. She yanked it aside. Behind it was a narrow built-in cupboard, its door half-latched from within. She turned to John. He was crying before she spoke. And all at once the years gave way. He told her that on the night Peter disappeared, they had ended up in the same tavern by chance after weeks of strain and unspoken resentment. Peter left first, choosing to walk the long road home through the dark because he was too drunk to drive. John remained behind for one drink more. Sometime later he took the car and followed the same road. He was too drunk to drive as well, but like many men in that condition, he had already persuaded himself that the road would obey him if he acted as though it must. It had been raining lightly. The bends outside town were narrow, bordered by ditch and stone, and on one sharp curve his headlamps caught Peter walking along the edge of the road with his collar turned up against the weather. John saw him too late. He was too drunk, too fast through the turn, and too slow in his hands to correct the wheel in time. The car struck Peter hard enough to throw him off the shoulder and into the ditch below. John stopped, stumbled out into the rain, and found him broken beside the road. The night felt so quiet in that moment that John had the mad impression time itself had stopped to witness what he had done. It was there, in the rain and the silence, that he understood he had killed his wife's brother. Then fear did what fear has always done when joined to selfishness. It began speaking in the language of necessity. John told himself he would lose everything: his marriage, his daughter, his work, his home, his life as he had built it. So he put Peter's body in the trunk, drove home through the rain, and carried him into the basement. There, in the unfinished service recess hidden behind the wall, he sealed the body in with bricks and cement before dawn. No one found anything because Margaret and June were spending that night at her mother's house, and John had the home to himself before suspicion returned. When he had finished, he built the narrow cupboard in front of the sealed space, set the storage cabinet over it, and returned to breakfast as if the world could be forced to accept the shape of his silence. Margaret stared at him with the expression of someone watching a stranger climb slowly out of a husband's face. Then, from inside the cupboard came a small sound. June. Alive. Frightened, but alive. Margaret tore the latch open. Inside, in the cramped, dark cupboard before the sealed wall where John had hidden Peter from justice, his living daughter was crouched beneath old blankets and loose boards, pale with dust and terror. Clutched under one arm was the blue cloth rabbit that had vanished days earlier. She threw herself into her mother's arms and would afterwards say only that she had followed the sound of someone crying in the basement. The police came at last. This time, John did not stop them. He confessed everything at the kitchen table while the remaining chairs stood around him like witnesses. When the officers led him out, the house was silent for the first time in weeks. Not peaceful, only complete, in the grim way truth completes a wound once it is cut open fully enough to drain. Later that evening, the police tore through the sealed masonry behind the cupboard and found the small hidden cavity where John had buried Peter's body. By morning, the whole town knew. John lost exactly what he had built his crime to preserve. His marriage ended in a look from Margaret that no courtroom sentence could have improved. June would never again trust the shape of home as easily as before. The life he had arranged so carefully around one concealed act split apart under the weight of the thing it had been built upon. As for the Bell House, no more things vanished after the confession. No more knocks sounded from the walls. Yet Margaret would forever understand what the place had tried to teach her in the only language a guilty home could speak: that houses do not become haunted because the dead return without reason. They become haunted because lies, once used as foundations, teach every room to lean toward collapse. And John Bell learned, too late, the oldest lesson fear refuses to learn when it first crosses the threshold into sin: that a man may commit injustice to save his life as he knows it, but any life preserved by concealment is already decaying beneath him, and sooner or later, all he have built tumbles down into the light beyond shadow.